Good morning, class. Because our Promethean board does not work, we're going to go ahead and use this video recorder. But the other thing, please remember that you can watch this again and again. Not that you're going to watch it 100 times, but especially if you want to see this lesson again, you can watch this on wesleyanmath.org/math. And that's www.wesleyanmath.org/math. And this is, again, Unit 1, so you're going to find your algebra teacher and then find Unit 1. So, first of all, the first thing we're going to have to remember is make sure you highlight your notes that this is chapter 3.2 and 3.3. Now, you may have already known this, but just a reminder that when we have just a variable or a number, or a variable and a number, such as 3x or 3 plus x or 7 plus a, we call that an expression. But when you throw in an equal sign, different rules are going to apply, and that would be called an equation. Equal sign equation. When it doesn't have an equal sign, it's called an expression. And please, as you go through, we're going to pause the video, so just make sure you kind of write down and listen to what we're saying. So here are 3 problems. This one right here is negative x divided by 2. I want you to pause the video, and I want you to do these 3 problems to see where we're at. These are 3 problems that we think you definitely have learned, and hopefully you remember. Alright, so here are the answers to the problem. Here you had, remember, you're trying to solve for x, you're trying to get rid of or cancel out everything but the x. So here you're multiplying by 2, so the opposite is divide, the inverse operation is divide by 2 on both sides. Negative 16 divided by 2 is negative 8. Here, you have to assume the negative sign goes either with the x or the 2, because it can't be on both. If it was on both, it wouldn't be negative. So I'm keeping the negative sign on the x. To get rid of divided by 2, I'm doing the opposite, which is times 2 on both sides. So 5 times 2 is 10. I'll bring down my negative x. But if you want to find out what x is, your final step is to get rid of, that's not a negative x. You can consider that to be a negative 1x. So I'm dividing both sides by negative 1. And 10 divided by negative 1 is negative 10. Last one. So first of all, I saw a minus a negative, so I changed it to plus a positive, because keep things in a subtraction. So now to get rid of a positive 4, I'm going to subtract 4 on both sides, cancels out the 4's. I'm left with x, the equal sign, and 6 minus 4, which is 2. Now, we're going to talk about fractions and equations, and this is probably going to be new to what you've done in the past. There's actually 3 ways to solve this problem. So go ahead and write this problem down, and we're going to talk about all 3 ways. First way is going to be if you do this by hand. Well, if you have fractions, you're going to want to get all your fractions to have common denominators. So, since this is 3/4 and this is 1/8, I can make both fractions have a denominator of 8. 3/4 becomes, because 4 goes into 8, you can multiply by 2 and you get, I'm just going to cross that off and make that 6/8. Now that you have common denominators, I can move the 6/8 over by subtracting 6/8. 6/8 minus 6/8 is 0. Now on this side, I'm going to subtract 6/8. I'm left with x equals, now I have 1/8 minus 6/8. So I'm going to do that problem off to the side. 1/8 minus 6/8. Well, 1/8 is actually smaller. You're going to end up with a negative number. So I'm going to keep, change, change. We're going to keep our denominator the same. And you get 1 plus a negative 6, which is negative 5. So x equals negative 5/8. So that's one way to do it. That's by hand. Now let's take the same problem, and since we have a graphing calculator, we're going to take the same problem, and we don't really need to find a common denominator. Our calculator is going to do that for us. So here's another way. I see 3/4, so it's positive 3/4, so I'm going to have to subtract 3/4 to get rid of it. Now I have 1/8 minus 3/4. So x equals 1/8 minus 3/4. I'm going to go to my graphing calculator. Now, when you put in fractions, you got to make sure that you put in the parentheses. So 1/8, 1, parentheses, 1 divided by 8, and parentheses, that's 1/8, minus, this is the negative sign down here. But when I want to do minus, you got to use your plus. 3/4. Hit enter, and it always gives you a decimal. Now, if you want to use the decimal, that's fine. There's a real easy way on your calculator to make that back into a fraction, and it's right here, this math button. If you hit math, once you get your answer, if you hit math, you'll see there's two options over here, 1 and 2. You could go to fraction or to decimal. So since we want it to go to fraction, I'm going to hit enter when it's on the 1. And it says right here, my calculator is going to have my answer to a fraction. I hit enter one more time, and it brings me back to my answer, -5/8, which was the same answer we got before. Because you're going to get the same answer, it's a different way to do it. And the final way that we can solve this same problem, 3/4 plus x equals -8, is to get rid of the fractions. Now, because you have an equation, it only works if you have an equation. You're allowed to do whatever you want to both sides of the equation. As long as you do it to one side and do it to the other, you're going to keep your equation balanced. Here's the concept that you need to understand. If you have 1/8 and you want to multiply a number, and we want to end up with a whole number, not a fraction, I can take any multiple of 8, such as 8. If I multiply 1/8 times 8, it's like 8/1, you end up with 8/8, which becomes the whole number 1. If I take another multiple of 8, say like 16, well, 1/8 times 16, you're going to end up with 16/8, which is 2. Or even another multiple, 24. You end up with the whole number 3. So as long as you look at the denominator and multiply by a multiple of it, you'll always end up with a whole number. Well, that's going to help us get rid of these fractions. You didn't really want to work with them. You have a denominator of 4 and a denominator of 8. So we have to think of a multiple of both 4 and 8. And this one's easy because 4 times 2 is 8 and 8 times 1 is 8. So 8 is a multiple of both of them. So if I multiply every single thing in this equation by 8, 8 times 3/4. Now again, you could do this on the calculator if you wanted to, but I'm just going to show you that it works out by hand. 24/4, which is 6. So you end up with 6. Now don't forget to multiply the x times 8, which is 8x. And then last, 1/8 times 8 is, we already did that over here, 1. Well, you just changed this equation into another equation, but it actually means the same thing. Why? You subtract 6 on both sides. You end up with 8x equals 1 minus 6 is -5. And then if you divide by 8, you end up with a fraction. X equals -5/8. So those are the 3 ways to do it. Now I want you to try. Try this one without getting rid of the fraction, and try this one by getting rid of the fraction. And I'm going to pause the video so that you can do these problems. Alright, for this one, I didn't get rid of the fraction. So I'm just going to subtract 4/5 on both sides. And I'm going to use my calculator, -2/3 minus 4/5. Parentheses. Now the negative sign, remember, is this button right here. So remember the problem. -2/3 minus 4/5. So now it's not a negative, it's going to use the minus sign, and then parentheses 4 divided by 5. And I'm going to hit enter. You get a weird decimal, but to change it back into a fraction, we're going to go back into math, option number 1, and you get -22/15, which you can leave. So I'm back to this. I'm going to bring down the negative sign, x, -22/15. Now, the last step is to remember to get rid of the times -1. So I'm going to divide both sides by -1, and you get the opposite of this, which is 22/15. Keep in mind that if you really wanted to, you could write your answer as this improper fraction, you can write it as a mixed number. 15 goes into 22, 1. And you're left with 7 left over, so it's 1 and 7/15. You could leave it like that. Or if you remember the original decimal, negative 1.4666666, so it repeats forever. You could also keep your answers there. Alright, now we got this one. We're going to try to get rid of the decimals. Before I do, though, I notice minus a negative. So I'm going to do 7/8 plus a positive x equals 9/4. So here, to get rid of the this is another one. You have an 8 and a 4. So we're going to multiply everything by the reciprocal. I'm sorry, not by the reciprocal, by a multiple of 8 and 4, which is 8. And when you do that, you end up getting a new equation. You get 7 plus 8x equals 9/4 times 8. You can do it by hand, but again, you could have done it on a calculator. Because it's multiplication, you're allowed to cross out diagonally. You get 18. And now I'm going to subtract 7 on both sides. And you're left with 8x equals 11. And x is going to equal 11 over 8. Remember, you could do exactly what you did here. You could leave it as an improper fraction, you could change it to a mixed number, or you can leave it as a decimal. Either way is fine. One quick thing I want to just remind you of, and this should also go into the notes, is please remember that if you get 8 over 4 as your final answer versus 4 over 8, those are two different answers. 8 divided by 4 is 2. But if you get 4 over 8, that's not 2. You could either leave it as a fraction and then reduce it, which you can get 1/2, or if you were to do 4 divided by 8, you'd obviously get 5/10. So make sure you remember the difference between these two answers that you get. Same thing with it, if you get 15 over 20, that's different than getting 20 over 15. So please make sure you're careful when you get those answers. All right. Last thing that we're going to learn today is how to get rid of fractions. So if you have 2/3 r equals 5, there's not a fraction over here, so there's really not a reason to multiply by a multiple of the 3. Instead, we have to remember this concept. 2/3, if you multiply any fraction by its reciprocal, if you flip it, you end up with getting exactly 1. 2/3 times 3/2 is 6 over 6, which equals 1. So if you just want this to say 1r, and it has 2/3 times r, the really easy way to get rid of the fraction is to just multiply by the reciprocal, because it's going to make it 1r as long as you do it to this side, 3 over 2. Please remember, if you're doing this by hand, this would be 5 over 1 times 3 over 2. Otherwise, you can do this right on your calculator. So you're going to get 15 over 2, which you can leave as an improper fraction. You can also make it 7 and 1/2, or you could do 7.5. Alright guys, and then let's go ahead and I want you to try these two problems, and we're going to pause the video so you can try them, and then we're going to go over the answers. So here are the answers. First one, you have 1/4, so to get rid of 1/4 and leave an x equals would be the reciprocal, which is 4 over 1, or you could say times 4, and you get negative 16. For this one, you have negative 2/8. So you've got to remember, you got to put the negative sign to one of them. So I'm going to make the negative sign to the 2. So the reciprocal would be 8 over negative 2. So I'm left with x equals, and then 6 times 8 over negative 2. So you end up getting 48 over negative 2. You could have just done 6 on your calculator times 8 over negative 2. And you are left with, by the way, 8 over negative 2 is the same thing. You could have also simplified this to negative 4. Because 8 divided by negative 2 is negative 4. 48 divided by negative 2 is negative 24. And there's the final answer. Go ahead, try one more for me. This is negative b over 6. The reason why I wanted to show you this one is just to kind of give you a heads up that when you have negative b over 6, it's really the same thing. There's a 1 in front of the b. So you could actually make that negative 1/6 times b. Either way, they mean the same exact thing. But here, since the whole thing's divided by 6, I'm going to multiply both sides by 6. Showing the work. Negative b equals 24. Divide by negative 1. So I am left with b equals negative 24. We're going to go ahead and give you about 10 problems or a couple problems from your homework just to start. And then we're going to pause it. We're going to come back and just talk real quickly about decimals. So for decimals, there's two ways you could actually cancel out decimals just like you could for fractions. The first way, you could do it like normal. If you have negative 15x equals 4 and 8/10, you could just say this is times negative 0.15 or 1500. So I can take the 1500th and divide by 1500, which equals whatever 4 and 8/10 divided by 1500. And again, you could just put this right in your calculator and you get an answer. Well, the other way to do it is with fractions, you multiply by the reciprocal. But there's a way in math that we can multiply decimals by something and move the decimals over. And that's if you multiply by 10, by 100, by 1,000. Well, here we only need to move, even though this one only needs to move, the decimal only needs to move one place over, this decimal could move two places over. And this is just to get it to be a whole number. You don't have to do this because, like in this problem, you could just do this using the decimal. But an easy way to get rid of the decimal would be to, since we have to move this over twice, I could take this whole equation and multiply it by 100. So this would move over twice, and I'm left with 15x. And then when this decimal moves over twice, you actually have to add a 0. So you get 15x equals 480. Now you can continue the problem as if just like normal. And x equals, instead of dividing decimals, if you didn't have a calculator, now you can just divide 480 by 15 and get whatever. But both of these you would get the exact same answer. So go ahead and so this is another example of this. You have this long equation with decimals. Again, you can leave the decimals in there, but if you notice every one of them, you can get it to be a whole number. In this case, you can multiply by 10, and the decimal moves over. You're left with 34x minus 12 equals 36. Again, this is an easier problem to work with. You'll get the same answer here as you will here, but now you just have whole numbers. And that's chapter 3. Please, tonight, if you're a little confused, you can watch the video again, and obviously we're going to get some problems done in class.